Well, welcome in. Good evening to an LSU Sports Insider Emergency Podcast, our live reaction show. I'm Zach Ewing. With me here is Scott Rabalais and Wilson Alexander, with me virtually anyway. And the news of the night, of course, bad news for LSU. They lose the nation's top quarterback recruit, Bryce Underwood, who has announced that he is flipping his commitment from LSU to Michigan tonight. That's his home state school. And this had kind of been a situation where we knew LSU was going to have to try to hang on to Bryce Underwood, guys. And what are we, 13 days from National Signing Day? And they didn't quite make it there. Michigan gets its man. And of course, it's not official until that signing day. But at this point, it sure looks like he's going to be a Wolverine.
Yeah, this is a huge loss for LSU. I mean, it can't really be understated how big this is. This is the guy who you talk about, this 2025 signing class that was so much reason for optimism moving forward with this program. Even after 3 straight losses, still like, well, they still have this really highly ranked class and headlined by Bryce Underwood, the number 1 quarterback in the country, the number 1 recruit in the country, for a program that wants to be building off of the high school ranks. It doesn't want to be relying on the transfer portal. This is the kind of approach it wants to take. And now the crown jewel of that is going elsewhere to Michigan. Michigan came in here over a while now here, building up NIL funds, pushing a lot of money in front of Bryce Underwood. And for a while, it looked like it wasn't even going to be enough. Coming out of Bryce's official visit over the Alabama game weekend, LSU sources felt really confident about that they were going to hold on to him, but the money just was not there in the end to hang on to Bryce Underwood. It seems like Michigan went even over the $10.5 million offer that Bryce said about a week ago now that he was reshared a post is that he was likely to decline that. Looks like maybe that was a negotiation tactic, and it seems like Michigan probably went higher than that number now to land him and deal LSU a really big blow on the recruiting trail and for the future of this program.
Yeah, Scott, we were talking off air just a minute ago about it's just a crazy world in recruiting right now, and we all knew with NIL that this sort of thing was possible, that you could have a bidding war between 2 major programs. Do you get the sense this was all about money? And Wilson, you can answer that too. Or was there a little bit of a, hey, I can stay home and be the quarterback of the future for my hometown school? Or was this just a bottom line, who pays me more?
From what we know right now, it certainly seems to be about money. I mean, this is a kid who's been committed to LSU since January, a kid who had not gone until apparently, according to a report I read, had not gone on the Michigan campus since the summer. Who'd been here, about 8 times, unofficial visits, yeah. And his official visit.
And just recently taken that official visit to LSU just 2 weeks ago.
I mean, it just looks like pure greed. And I say that, thinking of Gordon Gekko and Wall Street saying greed is good. If LSU had done this to a longtime Michigan recruit, people would be dancing in the streets, it's it all's fair in love and war and recruiting, I guess, but it's still sickening. It's the overall thing. If this was a kid, a longtime recruit flipping from South Carolina to Washington, I would still say it's kind of sickening, but it's the world we live in, and it's the part about I love college athletics. I really do. I love covering it, but this is the part that just makes you feel like you go take a shower after I write something about this, and that's the way it is. And I'm running up another line from a movie from a famous Atlanta sports writer where Wilson is from, O.B. Keeler, who covered Bobby Jones back in the day. Bobby Jones stayed an amateur his whole golf career. And O.B. Keeler reportedly said money is going to ruin sports. And it has. It has in a lot of ways.
I would just push back against that just to say, I guess it has. I know a lot of people feel that way about college athletics these days, that money is ruining it. Yeah, I suppose so. But especially college, now that we're in this age for sort of post-amateurism, but are still kind of playing amateurism, and it isn't in a lot of ways. This is the playing field that you're on these days now. And LSU is on the same playing field as Michigan. But Michigan here, to the point of keeping somebody home, they really could not afford the egg on their face of losing him to LSU. Even though he'd been committed to LSU since January, more than 300 days committed to LSU. And the money wasn't the thing here, then he probably does stick to LSU If it hadn't gotten to be such a high number, maybe he does. We haven't heard from Bryce Underwood yet. Maybe we won't even until signing day about what he says about that. But this is a guy who was very close to Michigan, but that number just got so high that obviously he ends up flipping, and that does seem to be the driving force here, because in the first place he didn't commit to Michigan; he committed to LSU when he very well could have stayed close to home from the very beginning.
Sure.
Yeah. Bryce Underwood, 17 years old. It's hard to get into the brain of a 17-year-old and know exactly what motivated him. But I think I speak for all of us when I say, if you offered me a couple $1 million more to go one place over the other, I would have to think about it. I mean, that's just the nature of how it is and how recruiting is now. So Bryce Underwood, he's 6'4", listed at 215 pounds. Strong arm, prototypical quarterback type. I mean, the type of guy who, if his career goes the way we think it will go, he's going to be a top 10 NFL draft prospect in a few years. I mean, he would have been, he probably will start for Michigan next year. I guess it's up in the air whether he would have started for LSU just because of the presence of Garrett Nussmeier. So let's go there next. And that's, I guess we're always looking at what's next. Garrett Nussmeier does have the option to come back to LSU next year. We don't know whether he will or not. That's a decision he'll make after the season. He could go into the draft or he could come back. I know, Scott, you've talked basically all year about how you think he could benefit from another year playing college football. And if he does, then LSU has its starting quarterback for next year. If he doesn't, that's where this becomes really interesting. And I would assume that's where the transfer portal comes in, and LSU would have to kind of take some of those NIL funds that were for Bryce Underwood and go to the transfer market.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly changes a whole lot of dynamics. I've been saying, and whether Underwood came or not, that I thought Nussmeier could benefit from being the quarterback here another year of development in college. I don't think he's ready for the NFL. I mean, he'd get drafted, but would you be a high draft pick? Would you be someone that the team wants to build their franchise around? Not at this point, I don't think. But I think another year he could have a leap forward like Joe Burrow did in 19 or Jaden Daniels did in 23. Maybe not as much, I don't know, but certainly progress. And so if you're LSU, that becomes part of your recruiting pitch too, right? That becomes part of your plan. And they have other quarterbacks on the roster. Obviously, AJ Swan transferred from Vandy. That's not a quarterback of the future, but you have Ricky Collins, and then you have Colin Hurley, who I think is Wilson. He's 12 years old or something like that. He came into college really early.
He came to school at 16. I think he's since turned 17. But yeah, he reclassified out of the 2025 class. He reclassified up to sign early, and now he is. I don't know if he's a quarterback of the future, but he's someone that you have to obviously just keep developing, and we'll see what he turns into. He's got a lot of arm talent, but it's I think unpolished at the moment would be probably a good way to describe it.
Sure, that's fair. So LSU, if Nussmeier doesn't come back next year, they're going to have a very unproven quarterback, leading them, unless they go in the transfer portal, and that's certainly a possibility now too. I think that becomes much more, I'll say probable, but certainly something that LSU's got to consider very much more. And so it opens up all kinds of things. It's not a death knell for the program. One recruit is not everything, no matter how good they are. If I may use women's basketball as a point, LSU was recruiting the number one player in the country, last name Chavez from Lubbock, Texas. Supposedly, she wanted too much NIL money than LSU was willing to part with. LSU took that money, spread it around, and signed 4 other players, and they got the number one recruiting class in the country. So you can do other things. But obviously, it's a black eye. It comes at a time when the program is taking a lot of lumps in the mid this 3-game losing streak and a season that's a disappointment, and everyone's questioning what the future is under Brian Kelly and his staff. It's just kind of piling on. It adds to the bleak nature of the outlook for LSU football, at least as it appears right now.
Oh, Wilson, you're muted. I think he's trying to.
This has been a really bad month. Yeah, sorry, I had my AirPods died, so I had to kind of adjust here on the fly. For LSU, it's been a really bad month. 3 straight losses, and now this. But back to the quarterback sort of position moving forward here for LSU. Bryce Underwood was the succession plan. I mean, this is the number one player in the country, the number one quarterback in the country. This was, sort of a transformative type recruit, especially for LSU, a school that has often in the past, lacked this kind of caliber of quarterback recruit. This is a guy who, it was a huge almost transformational moment when he when he committed. But now that he's flipped, you got to figure out something else here, because he was the successor to Garrett Nussmeier. I actually got a question on the mailbag this week. When is the earliest that Bryce Underwood would play for LSU? And there was a few different scenarios. I think it was if Nussmeier came back and played well, then you sit him for a year. He takes over as a sophomore. If Nussmeier comes back but he doesn't play well, then huge quarterback controversy next year. Calls for Underwood to play get really, really loud, and then maybe he ends up taking over at some point next year. Or this third option, which was Nussmeier leaves and Underwood was a starter. Well, now you don't have any of that, obviously. And it is absolutely vital now for LSU to hang on to Garrett Nussmeier going into next season to provide some stability. Otherwise, your options are, as you said, A.J. Swan, a Vanderbilt transfer who started some at Vanderbilt, but we haven't seen it at all this year. You have Ricky Collins, a now redshirt freshman who's come in very briefly in relief of Garrett Nussmeier as the number 2 quarterback, a guy who can do a little bit more with his legs, but has needed to develop over the past couple of years as a passer, and somebody who you would be then now starting for the first time, in the SEC, if that ended up being the case. Or as we already mentioned, Colin Hurley, again, a true freshman at the moment, was very young, unpolished, needed time to develop, and would probably be third on that pecking order. Or you go to the transfer portal. And as we understand, sort of this past transfer cycle, quarterbacks, established ones, were going, I think Matt Rule said, for like $1.2 million. And that's actually a little bit less than what LSU had earmarked for.
They kind of freed up the cap space, didn't they? LSU.
So, kind of like you were just saying a minute ago, Rab, you can divert that money elsewhere, I guess, if you need to. But the big thing is, I would say, to spend that money on Garrett Nussmeier, get him to come back, and then figure out your succession plan after that. LSU doesn't at the moment have a quarterback committed in 2026. I'm not sure really just how much you were going to be looking at one, at least a top one, because you had Bryce Underwood. Now that probably changes. Now you're thinking we got to get probably a top quarterback in 2026. You've got Elijah Haven, Baton Rouge native, in 2027, but you really can't afford to wait that long, because you got to have somebody there to play in 2026 if Garrett Nussmeier doesn't come back. And so, who does that end up being? Maybe that's when we see LSU go into the transfer portal for a quarterback, is for that 2026 season, if it doesn't think that the guys who are on the roster at that time are ready to play. That would kind of be the way that they have to look at this now over the next couple of years. And it starts with keeping Garrett Nussmeier.
If I may appeal to the judge, the host, Zach Ewing, I have a question for Wilson. And there's no way for us to know at this point, but do you think that the struggles we've seen with the LSU offense the last few weeks, last few games, last month, had any impact? Because clearly, you could, earlier this season, when LSU was going great guns offensively, and Michigan was struggling on offense, you could say, well, obviously he wants to come to LSU and be developed. Look, you got a first-year coach at Michigan, Sharon Moore. You don't know what direction they're going in. Do you think that might have had any impact here, the fact that the offense has taken a nosedive in the last month?
It certainly hasn't helped. I mean, that was kind of like you said, that was one of the points that LSU pitched Bryce Underwood on, was come here after, he committed not long after Jaden Daniels won the Heisman Trophy. It was, I guess, about a month or so, month and a half later. And after having seen that offense and, come here, develop. Yes, we might not give you quite as much money as Michigan is going to give you, but you're going to be able to play an offense that can really accentuate your talents and send you to the next level to be the next number 2 or maybe even the number 1 overall pick like Jaden Daniels was. Especially because Bryce Underwood as a quarterback prospect has some similar traits. I mean, he can run the football. That's a big part of his tape. He's got a great arm. Some of the things that you saw in Jaden Daniels, and so maybe this would be well suited for him. But yeah, this past month. Here in particular, the offense has just taken a complete nosedive. Found this stat working on a story for the weekend now about what has happened to LSU's offense. Over the past decade, the offense that finished first in the country in scoring, what they did the next season, LSU right now is on pace to have the second biggest drop year over year. A lot of those offenses stayed kind of in the top 10. Some of them ended up in like the 30s the next season. LSU from the 2019 to 2020 season ended up in the 30s in terms of scoring offense. This year, right now, they're 57th in scoring offense and points per game. They're averaging less than 30 points per game. And, did it make the difference here? I don't know, but it didn't help. It sort of removed that argument, that talking point. That was something that LSU was able to lean on when it was pitching him on, come play in this offense, come develop here. Those sorts of things maybe didn't carry quite the same amount of weight as they could have if your offense was still rolling. But again, I think in the end here, the money was probably the main difference. If everything else was the same, maybe this doesn't happen. But it's all speculation at this point too.
Great conversation here between our advocate sports columnist Scott Rabalais and LSU football beat writer Wilson Alexander. You're watching a live reaction podcast from the LSU Sports Insider as Bryce Underwood, #1 recruit in the country, has flipped his commitment from LSU to his home state school of Michigan tonight. Obviously a big blow to LSU guys. A couple of things I wanted to note. Another is that there's another top recruit, wide receiver Derek Meadows out of Bishop Gorman High School in Las Vegas, who's rumored to also be considering flipping to Michigan and following Bryce Underwood. And so the dominoes may not be done falling in a negative way here for LSU. And then just to kind of piggyback on something, you said, Rab, a month ago, LSU was coming off the Ole Miss victory. They were preparing for Texas A&M. They were top 10 in the nation. College football playoff, had a top 5 recruiting class coming in. Everything was humming, and it has gone so badly in the last 4 weeks or so, between the results on the field, obviously with 3 straight losses. Now everything that you're playing for is gone, but also now on the recruiting cycle. We know Brian Kelly's buyout is $61 million. It's extremely unlikely that money is lying around anywhere. But this has to turn up the heat on him. It has to turn up the heat on Joe Sloan, whose offense has stagnated. He's also was the lead recruiter, I believe, for Bryce Underwood and for Derek Meadows. So what does this do just to the momentum of the program, to the stature of the coaching staff? You hate to overreact to something in the immediate aftermath, but this is a pretty big blow.
Yeah, and it's just stuff that's come out of seemingly nowhere. Like I said, they'd won 6 in a row going to A&M. They had this big win over Ole Miss and a win at South Carolina that's looked even better as the season has gone on. This big comeback victory they had there. You're talking about you're tied for first. The last 2 undefeated SEC teams in SEC play, LSU and Texas A&M, and it's. I remember Ken Burns, the documentarian, calling it the high water mark of the Confederacy, Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. And the high water mark of this LSU season was the third quarter of the Texas A&M game, when they're controlling the game, when they're up 10 points, and then it's just all seemed to unravel, and in so many different places. It's like a house of cards. They pulled one card here. Maybe the Garrett Dellinger injury, and he's still, he practiced today, Brian Kelly said, by the way, but, we don't know if he's going to play on Saturday against Vandy. And it's just all kind of unraveled in a lot of different ways. LSU will still have a recruiting class. They'll still get a lot of good players, but it does change the dynamic. Part of the selling point for keeping Joe Sloan, and you had people like, on a local radio show, they had Paul Feinbaum on last night. He said, I would have fired Joe Sloan already. Now, that's easy for Paul Feinbaum to say, obviously sitting in Charlotte, North Carolina, but that's what he said. Part of the argument for keeping Joe Sloan was that, as Wilson said, he's the lead recruiter. As y'all said, he's the lead recruiter for Bryce Underwood. If he's not coming, makes it easier for Brian Kelly to say, this hasn't worked, I need to go in a different direction. Maybe the same thing for Cortez Hankton, who is the co-offensive coordinator. For him to make changes on offense, this offense obviously has clearly regressed. And you knew it would somewhat from last year, but it's really regressed. And so, yeah, it turns up the heat on him. It turns up the heat on Brian Kelly and all that. You've been as they say in gambling, betting on the come. You've been betting on, hey, this is going to be good eventually. You got this recruiting class. We gave it some time. And there's some great things coming down the road, and now there's still some very good things coming down the road, but it's not quite as great. And over the long term, you go real big picture. You really zoom out here as I'm getting away from the camera. It begs the question: is LSU going to be able to compete nationally in this new era of college athletics, in the NIL transfer portal era? Obviously, the NIL era is going to change most likely next year, Wilson, right? With the revenue sharing likely coming online next summer. But it still begs that question, and I don't think any of us have that answer right now.
Yeah, it's too hard to really. I think that's probably a conversation that's maybe forecasting too far ahead. But as we've known over the last couple of years, LSU has been trying to catch up in NIL. It is not at the level of the top programs in the SEC. If you were to consider it like a national thing with all of the programs everywhere, then yeah, it's fine. But it's in terms of who it's competing against, it's been trying to catch up, and I think that's gotten better over the past year or so. They've been able to. You're able to donate to Bayou Traditions, the collective, through TAF now, which makes things a little bit more streamlined. And LSU was gonna. Sources told me. I mean, the offer to Bryce Underwood was around $1.5 million per year. And a total number is hard to exactly nail down because would he have stayed for 3 or 4 years, et cetera. And that would have made him the highest paid player on the team. One source told me. So, LSU had gotten some money here together, especially by its standards, and that was competitive in the quarterback market. Bryce Underwood is going to be getting paid over, or likely getting paid over market value, what you would usually have for a quarterback. Michigan, I think, ponied up a huge number here because it probably felt like it couldn't, afford to lose him. And LSU really can't afford to lose him either, but isn't in the same place financially because you don't have just like the 1 or 2 or 3 like really deep pocketed donors around here. And LSU hasn't been able to make up for that necessarily with grassroots funding. Again, I think it has improved, but it is still just not the richest area for that. And, maybe revenue sharing will help, but especially because the NCAA wants to crack down on, sort of these outside NIL offers, wants to get, really be able to maintain like what they call true NIL, not eliminate pay for play by having it all go through an enforcement arm. And what that enforcement arm is actually going to look like, we'll see. And all of this, of course, still hinges on the House settlement actually going through. That has not happened yet. It's expected to happen, or it would happen in early April and then go into effect kind of over the summer ahead of the next season. And so, those are all the things kind of at play right now. And it will. I guess I don't really have a point to add after that. That's just kind of everything that's kind of the scene at the moment, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, look, the program is on much shakier feet than maybe we thought it was. Even a month ago, but certainly more than a couple of years ago. You've got to have a head coach who's willing to play in these NIL games and win some of them. I think the question remains whether Brian Kelly is that guy. Of course, the rest of the class is still very good. I think it's still ranked number 6 in the 24/7 composite rankings. So right. Now, again, Derek Meadows may be another defection on the way, and maybe that drops. There's still 2 weeks to signing day, so we don't know. So we'll keep you up. Go ahead, Wilson.
I was going to say that's just the thing to sort of reset about signing day here. We're 2 weeks away from that. LSU still has a top 10 recruiting class. You still have Harlem Berry. You still have DJ Pickett. You still have a couple other corners like Cade Phillips, who could really be a boost of talent to this team. I mean, those are some guys who can come in and play right away as freshmen. It's like not the recruiting class is not falling apart completely, but LSU does need to now keep everybody together. And I think a lot of attention now gets put on Jakeem Stewart, the number 1, defensive lineman here in Louisiana, reclassified up a year. He's in the midst of taking visits, and he came recently to LSU for that Alabama game. We'll see if LSU can keep him here in state. That's kind of now like the main focus on signing day, and just in general keeping this whole class together. Harlem Berry, the top running back, said on X tonight that he's not making any statements or answering any questions about Bryce Underwood, and used the hashtag LSU football. So it seems like he's probably maybe still solid and all those things. And we'll see how the rest of it unfolds. But this is still a recruiting class. It's got a couple of 5-stars in it, got some other highly rated players, and LSU needs to continue to build on that. But obviously, that's trying to put some rose-colored lenses on there for people who might be losing their minds. You still, I completely understand, should frankly be very disturbed in some ways, or maybe that's strong, but upset and worried. There's the word, worried about what Underwood's decommitment means.
And look, like I said earlier, if LSU could have flipped a quarterback from somewhere else, people would be very happy about it. This is part of the thing that makes it so devastating or so difficult to deal with is that LSU's put all its eggs in the Bryce Underwood basket. They don't have another quarterback. They've been obviously top-notch quarterbacks. There aren't a lot of them. The guys of this caliber, and they aren't. They're spoken for. They're playing. There's not likely to be someone to say, Bryce Underwood's not going to LSU now. I'm gonna go to LSU. I'm gonna decommit from. I mean, I guess anything could happen, as we've seen, but that's the really bad part of this, and it happens both ways. It's happened for LSU and against LSU over the years, and you can cite lots of examples. But yeah, they've committed. They've gone down the road with this kid. They've built their class around him, their hopes around him, and all of a sudden, he's like, nope, I'm going somewhere else. And look, I think you got to go after a Bryce Underwood if you can get him. He's from very far away, but I still think it's maybe a lesson to be learned for this staff that if when you go away from the LSU region, and by that I mean East Texas to the Florida Panhandle into Georgia a little bit, Mississippi, whatever, you're running more of a risk, and to compare to that guy who wants to stay home, and that might have been part of it for Bryce Underwood, at least 10%. It's like, hey, I'll stay home, and stay close to home. And now, LSU, yeah, you still got to try. You still got to try. Is it worth the risk? I guess so, but it's a risk LSU's going to have to contemplate a little more often next time, I think.
Well, as far as quarterbacks go, look, as we said, Bryce Underwood would have been a first for this program. It would have been the highest rated quarterback recruit LSU ever brought in. It certainly would have not been the sort of quarterback that you're used to. Now, it's funny to say that you've got a school that's had 2 Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks in the last 5 years, but not from the high school level. Yeah, they were both transfers. And so it does make you wonder, as far as the quarterback saga goes, and you've got the rest of the signing class, they've still got 2 games to play. They'll have a bowl game. I mean, there's lots going on. But as far as the quarterbacks go, and we can wrap things up here, guys, the next step is really finding out what Garrett Nussmeier's plans are after the season. And once you have that, then okay, if he's leaving for the NFL, I think, we talked about all the options that are on the roster. I think you've got to hit the portal in that scenario. If Garrett Nussmeier leaves, I don't know that you have a ready-made starter on this roster for a coaching staff that may go into next season kind of at least on a warm seat if Nussmeier leaves. And so then that becomes a whole transfer portal. I'd encourage you to read too. If you're not subscribed, by the way, to The Advocate, this is a great time to do it because you're going to get all of Wilson and Scott's stuff. And by the way, Jeff Duncan down in New Orleans, he's working on 2 stories right now. I'll just break the news and let everybody know they're coming. One is on Jakeem Stewart and the whole saga of his high school career going from St. Aug to Edna Carr, and he's only played 11 high school games. What's going on with this guy? And the other is on Tulane quarterback Darian Mensah, who may be like the top quarterback in the transfer portal this year. We don't know what he's going to do, but Jeff talked to him. Darian Mensah's got 2 years left to play. He's going to be a name that if Garrett Nussmeier leaves, you're going to hear. So now this opens up all these possibilities, guys. So just your final thoughts on tonight, what it means for LSU and where they go from here.
Well, as you said, just that it's vital to keep Nussmeier. You need some stability at that position in particular heading into next season. This is a guy who, first-year starter has had some struggles, particularly in terms of turnovers and over the past 3 weeks. But we've seen around here what an offseason of development can do. And there's no reason to think that maybe Nussmeier wouldn't get better going into his second full season as a starter. Now, LSU is going to have a whole lot of turnover on the offensive line, and that's going to be something to watch for this offense in particular. But, Field Yates of ESPN said there's been a sense in the scouting community that Nussmeier is coming back. We'll see exactly what he ends up doing. One thing to note that's interesting, Shea Dixon over at On3, guy who's super plugged into LSU recruiting, said that tonight that he's barring a shift that LSU might be going after a transfer portal quarterback in the coming weeks. And so we'll see exactly what this room looks like next year. But I think either way, it all starts with keeping Nussmeier, a guy who certainly has plenty of arm talent, and trying to continue to build around him as you move forward and figure out what you're going to do at that position, the most important one you got on the team. And so as for the program and where things are moving forward, this isn't going to affect, I think, the players in the locker room too much this weekend in terms of playing Vanderbilt. But they got to go and get, they've got to go and get a win this weekend. Start to try to do something positive to kind of close out the season and be able to take maybe a breath in the off season here going into 2026. But yeah, the seat's going to be warm for everybody over there, especially on the offensive side. This was the thing with Bryce Underwood that gave you confidence moving forward, and gave you a lot of in the staff and in the program, and now they've got to be able to regroup and get the right guys in the building to be able to get this thing back on track after a disappointing season.
I kind of should have brought this earlier, but the news about Underwood broke right after. Within a minute of Brian Kelly ending his news conference with us in the football operations facility this evening, and I thought it was a little bit short. I couldn't tell anything from his attitude, but I have to believe, given the timing of everything, that he knew about Underwood when he spoke to us. But I thought maybe they cut it a little short. Like they were thinking, we're going to ask a question. He's going to get out of the room before we can ask it, before someone sees it on their laptop computer. Most of the writers had their laptops. I walked out in the hallway. There were some LSU football players, and they were shocked. There was, so you could say there was literally shock in that football building. And this is going to take some time. They're going to have to regroup and see where they go from here. But who would have thought, guys? Who would have thought that the Vanderbilt game would be so big, at least from a psychological standpoint? Like you just said, Wilson. I think you captured it perfectly. They need something positive to happen. They just need a win. They just need some kind of win. And you can have recruiting wins, and you can have wins on the field. And recruiting wins sometimes are great because in a way it's like you beat all these other top schools for that top player, and when you lose them, it's like you lost to a Michigan, and LSU Michigan have never played in football. So it's a very interesting time. I think more than ever we're all wondering what the direction of this program is under Brian Kelly and what the future holds, and it doesn't have to be all terrible, but it's certainly could go a lot of different ways right now, and that starts with the Vanderbilt game that suddenly becomes even more important on Saturday.
All right, so we will see you then, and we're going to have LSU Insider Podcast twice a week, of course, all the way through. Talk some signing day next week and really get into that. So thanks for hanging out with us tonight. Again, the news: Bryce Underwood. If you haven't heard, I don't know how you wouldn't have heard, but Bryce Underwood flipping his commitment from LSU to Michigan tonight, and so a blow to LSU's recruiting class. And like you guys say, when things are going bad on the field, at least with recruiting, you can sell hope. And LSU kind of lost some of that hope. And it's still a good recruiting class, but not quite as good as it was. You lose the crown jewel of that recruiting class. So for Scott Rabalais and Wilson Alexander, I'm Zach Ewing. Again, thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll have another LSU Insider Podcast for you coming Monday. So keep it tuned, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button for us, and keep it locked here.